morning, or depending on when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always, told out of Voice of Radio. So today, I thought it would be fun to have a little bit of a chat about all the different ways we've had in the Pokémon TCG to win that aren't the usual way. So we've got the usual ways of taking 6 prizes, knocking out your opponent's final Pokemon, or your opponent having 0 cards in deck when they go to draw. These are normal, these are boring. What else have we got? Well, we've got one effect that's actually come up in 2 different situations that we can deal with nice and quickly because it's just not that much fun. We had a Slowbro that did this back in Breakpoint, and we had an Unown that did this in Silver Tempest, and pay attention to Unown, oh, it's coming back. And both of them were free colourless energy. If you've got only 1 prize remaining, you win the game. Yay! I'll be honest with you, it's really just another way of saying instant KO on anything. Because if you've got 1 prize remaining, well, yeah, this takes that last prize. It's fun, it's nice, but it's not exactly a particularly big deal. Cool little thing, but I think it's fair to say, not really in the spirit of what we're looking for. Technically, it's an alternate win condition, so we had to mention it, but we can do better than that. Like, for instance, Lost World. This, ladies and gentlemen, was very, very fun. Lost World was a stadium card that we were all genuinely worried was going to wreck the game. We thought at the time that this might actually be a card that was so good it would ruin the Pokémon TCG. It didn't. Actually turned out it wasn't that good. Sorry about that. I mean, there were a few people here and there that had little runs of it, but it turned out to not be particularly good. But Lost World was a stadium card that said once during each player's turn, if that player's opponent had 6 or more Pokemon in the Lost Zone, that player may choose to win the game. Don't know why you wouldn't, except to maybe, I suppose, play the clock. But most of the time, yeah, that's kind of amazing. So then we ask the question, well, all right then, how do we get 6 of our opponent's Pokemon in the Lost Zone? Well, our main friend here was Gengar Prime, and man, every time I make a video about Primes, I get a little bit sad because I remember that Primes are gone, and I loved that time in the Pokemon TCG. Now, it did have a Pokebody that said as long as this was your active Pokemon, any Pokemon that would be knocked out, go into the Lost Zone instead, but the only actual attack you had was Curse Drop that placed 4 damage counters. It wasn't great. But Hurl into Darkness was. You looked at your opponent's hand and chose a number of Pokemon equal to the number of Psychic Energy attached to Gengar and put those Pokemon into the Lost Zone. Well, that was awesome, ladies and gentlemen. That worked very nicely. Oh no, I hear you shout. What if your opponent didn't have any Pokemon in hand? Oh yeah, don't worry about that. We played Seeker. You see, Seeker let you pick up one of your Pokemon and made your opponent pick up one of their Pokemon. And of course, as soon as they picked up one of their Pokemon, well then they guaranteed to have a Pokemon in hand. And that meant this would actually work. It was awesome. There were some other ways to do it that weren't quite as good. Mime Jr. was a great option in the early game, and it did unfortunately have to be an early game option. But Mime Jr. had a 0 energy attack to put the top card of your opponent's deck into the Lost Zone, and then not for nothing, it then went to sleep. And if you were asleep, you couldn't be hurt, which was fun. So that was another little option. It wasn't great, but you'd occasionally hit a Pokemon off of that, and that would be kind of fun. And there was a combo here to be made with Palkia Level X as well, which I was never such a huge fan of, I'll be honest with you. But Palkia G Level X had the Poké Power Lost Cyclone that said, once during your turn you may use this power. Any player who has 4 or more bench Pokemon chooses free, and the rest go to the Lost Zone. So it basically forced your opponent to have a low bench or get hit with that. Wasn't perfect, but it was a fun little way to do it. We thought Lost World was going to be broken, actually ended up being a little bit overblown. But then later, we would have a trio of Unown, 2 of which were so good, they literally end up getting banned. The other one was Unknown Missing, which was not good. Just very quickly with Unknown Missing, that gave you an alternate win condition, and essentially that one allowed you to win the game using its ability as long as your opponent had 12 or more supporter cards in the loss zone. We never had a good way to do this, I'll be honest with you. This is one of those ones that sounds really fun, and then you realise it's just not going to work. Cool idea, enjoyed the idea, never actually worked. Sorry about that. The best way to do it, so again, it's a bit awkward, and I cannot stress this enough, never really worked. But we had a Trumbeak that said, once during your turn, if this Pokemon's in your hand, you may reveal it. If you do, look at the top card of your opponent's deck. Put this Pokemon in the lost zone. If the card you looked at was a supporter, you put it into the lost zone. But you had to get 12 cards into the lost zone for this to actually work. There was also a Girafarig that we could use as well at the same time, that put 2 cards from your opponent's discard pile into their lost zone. I wish this worked. It never did. Unknown Missing was, I'm going to say it, missing from the top tables. But the other 2 got banned. So let's take a look at Unown Damage. Unown Damage was fun. It said, once during your turn, if this Pokemon is your active Pokemon, and there are 66 or more damage counters on your bench Pokemon, you may use this ability. If you do, you win this game. So what you had to do was take a bunch of damage. And look, this was not, and I cannot stress this enough, this was not a situation where you sat there and crossed your fingers and hoped your opponent did enough damage and then you drop Unknown and win. Nah, mate. These were Pokemon where you went for ridiculous combinations. And it was fun. So take Unown Damage, alright? 66 damage counters you need on the field. Well, basically here, we want our old friend Wailord. There's Wailord EX that had 250 HP, and then later Magikarp and Wailord that had 300. This was what you would use to stash your damage counters. Alright? Brilliant. But we needed to get the damage counters. How do we get the damage counters? And we had a couple of ridiculous combos that were incredibly fun. So one of them, you had Team Magma's Secret Base. That said that whenever you benched a Pokemon, you could put 2 damage counters on it. Brilliant. That was really fun. And then what you would do is you would bench your Klefki. And Klefki would take the 2 damage counters. Then we go to our old friend Reuniclus. Reuniclus lets you move the damage around your side of the board. You can move the damage from one of your Pokemon to another. Now, I've made videos about these on the channel. Go and look them up if you want a more in-depth explanation, but I'm going to tell you how it works here, so we're good. So you bench Klefki, and you use then Reuniclus to move the damage onto a Wailord. Brilliant. Why specifically Klefki? Well, because Klefki had a really nice ability. It let you attach it to one of your Pokemon as a Pokemon tool. The ability Wonderlock said, if this Pokemon's on your bench, you can discard all cards from it and attach it to one of your Pokemon as a Pokemon tool. No one cares what it did afterwards, that wasn't important. So what you would do is bench Klefki with Team Magma's Secret Base in play, move the damage over using Reuniclus, and then you would attach Klefki as a Pokemon tool to one of your Pokemon. And that's where Weavile came into play. As often as you like during your turn, you may put a Pokemon tool card attached to one of your Pokemon into your hand. And now we've got the loop. Team Magma's Secret Base needs to be in play, and then you bench Klefki, take the damage. Use Reuniclus to move it over to a Wailord, attach Klefki to one of your Pokemon, use Weavile to put it into your hand, bench it to take 2 damage counters, move the damage counters off, attach it to a Pokemon, Weavile it back into your hand, and round we go. Yes, it takes a little bit of setup, but you can bench Klefki as often as you like during your turn. And you can use Weavile and Reuniclus as often as you like during your turn. And once you've got it established, you are rolling. this was a fun one. There was a slightly easier way to do this, again using Wailord, and it was a combination of Blastoise and Frozen City. Yes, stadiums come in here quite nicely. Blastoise let you attach as much energy during your turn as you like, and Frozen City said that whenever you attach an energy to a non-Team Plasma Pokemon, you put 2 damage counters on that Pokemon. So the theory here was very simply that you are attaching all of your energy using Blastoise to any non-Team Plasma Pokemon, but let's face it, Wailord, while you've got Frozen City in play, and then you are golden. Job's a good 'un. But hang on a second. That's too much energy. How are you going to get that much energy? Energy Reset from Fates Collide. This was a hidden card that made this work. You attached a bunch of energy with Blastoise, and then you used Energy Reset to pick them all up, and then put them back down again, because attaching 33 energy is ridiculous. But attaching 11 energy and playing 2 Energy Resets, frankly, a lot more reasonable. It was never the best deck in the format. It didn't cause a huge problem in that regard, but essentially both of these combos showed Pokemon, we can break this card, and Pokemon went, yeah mate, we're out, we're good. And then we saw basically exactly the same thing with Unown Hand. Exactly the same kind of deal. A seemingly innocuous ability which should be really hard to pull off. Because if it's active, and you got 35 cards in hand, you win the game. Again, this should be overly difficult to pull off. This should be something which was borderline impossible, but a fun little thing that maybe someone works occasionally. But nah, mate, we found 2 different ways to do it. Now, one of which revolved around Sylveon GX. Sylveon GX would sit in the active and had an attack for a single energy that let you search your deck for any free cards and put them into your hand. And yes, you searched for free cards, which was awesome. But then we also had a bunch of Fairy Charm. Now, I'm not going to go through all of them. There were a bunch of them. But for instance, Fairy Charm Fighting prevented all damage to the Fairy Pokemon this is attached to by fighting Pokemon GX and EX. Or Fairy Charm Ability that did the same thing for Pokemon with abilities. There were a few of these, so you could hopefully get a bunch of immunity while you spent a bit of time setting up. And as you were doing this, we actually used a Alolan Sandslash, which seems really underwhelming. But it drew a card every turn. And it literally just drew a card every turn, but it was a Stage 1 Pokemon. It's the best we had, alright? It did it. It did it fine. And we actually use How, which is just a boring, plain, ordinary, everyday, run-of-the-mill draw free. But you're drawing free with How, while you're also drawing one with Alolan Sandslash, while you're also searching out your cards with Sylveon and hopefully getting a bit of immunity while you do so. And then we finish off, the big finish here is with Virizion GX. Now, what this did was Breeze Away GX. This was your 1 per game GX attack. But it put any number of your Pokemon in play and all cards attached to them into your hand, which would include all the tools, etc. So you build up your bench of a bunch of Stage 1s and you put tools and energy and all of that on, and then you use Virizion, put all those cards into your hand, and then next turn you're gonna win and life is good. There was another way to do it though, which basically revolved around Magnezone and Whitney. Now, Magnezone let you play 2 supporter cards in 1 turn. And this was Dual Brains. This was rather important. And which supporter card would you play? Well, I've already given a game away here. It's Whitney. And Whitney said draw a card and then draw 2 cards for each other Whitney in your discard pile. Now, drawing 2 initially is a bit rubbish, but when you've got 3 Whitney in your discard pile, well, all of a sudden, that's 8 cards. Except you can do it twice with Magnezone, that's 16 cards. That's ridiculous. And of course, you'd use Versus Seeker so that you can play Whitney, so you get all 4 in the discard, and then you Versus Seeker one up, draw 8. And in theory, you're drawing like 16 cards with Magnezone, which was hilarious. And we also at the time had A-Spec, so you could use Scoop Up Cyclone as your A-Spec of choice, so that you could essentially do like a mini Virizion. It's not perfect, but it's not too bad. Now, one of the problems we had at the time was like N and Judge, which would make you put your entire hand back into your deck, and that was actually like super annoying, and we didn't like it. So we had a Sableye. Yes, I know Sableye is always good. I know we talk about Sableye way too much. I'm sorry. Sableye sees a ridiculous amount of play in like 50 different versions. I don't know what to tell you. But this particular Sableye had an attack for a single energy that stopped your opponent playing supporter cards, which would stop things like N, but would also just slow your opponent down, which was really fun. And then you would just draw a bunch of cards using 2 supporters per turn with Magnezone, and then you would get to the point where you had enough and you won the game. And again, just like with Unown Damage, there was never one format, even in Expanded, where people are winning with it constantly. It just got to the point where it was too abusable. So we had Slowbro and Umbreon that were kind of a bit boring, honestly. Lost World that everyone thought was going to be a problem but really wasn't. And then Unown Hand and Unown Damage that ended up being such a potential problem they got banned. Which actually really sucks for us, because they were the most recent proper alternate win conditions, and they ended up getting banned. And I think that might have basically convinced Pokemon not to do this again, and that's really sad. So there we go. Alternate win conditions, lot of fun, but now it's over to you guys. Tell me which of these cards you remember, tell me if you played any of these decks, tell me what you think and whether you'd like this kind of stuff to come back again in the future. Go nuts in the comment section, but be nice! And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWasi. That's where we talk about Pokemon and a whole bunch of other card games. And please do consider checking out patreon.com/PTCGradio, where you can support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all kinds of fun things. And get shoutouts on the channel like the lovely Star of Dav, who's been a supporter of ours for a while now and is a very lovely person. So shout out to them for the support and the loveliness. But by far the most important thing as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.